The White Bear Area Chamber of Commerce and SCC TV are proud to present Your Business Matters, dedicated to your business needs. The White Bear Area Chamber is a nonprofit business organization serving as advocates to the White Bear area and its business community. Now, here's the Executive Director of the White Bear Area Chamber and the host of Your Business Matters, Tom Snell.
Welcome to Your Business Matters, brought to you by the White Bear Area Chamber of Commerce. Each month, we interview community leaders and local business owners so you can be informed about the developments in our community. I'm pleased to welcome John Gohmann, the president of Minnesota Commercial Rail. John and I will discuss the economic development issues related to commercial rail and how it impacts the Minnesota community and our local businesses. John, thank you for joining us today on Your Business Matters.
My pleasure to do it.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
What I would like to start out with is just to ask you a little bit about your business. What got you interested in the rail business, and when did you start?
Well, my own career started 52 years ago when I was 18, when I hired out as a brakeman to work myself through college in Iowa. And then it emulated from there to work for the rail industry in the National Railway Labor Conference. I formed a consulting company because around 1980 there was umpteen railroad big bankruptcies, and people were looking for help how to salvage rail lines.
So that's how it started. Going to bankruptcies, you said?
Oh, yes, yes.
And why was that?
Well, the problem was that the railroads were overregulated. They could not abandon or let go of money-losing lines or marginal lines. Several railroads in the east, 7 of them, Conrail, Erie, Lackawanna, several more, Lehigh Valley, I won't name them all went into bankruptcy.
Okay.
And then in the Midwest, the Milwaukee Road and the Rock Island went into bankruptcy.
Oh, Rock Island is a railroad that a lot of people have heard about.
Oh, sure, sure.
Yep. So, and then you got in that way, and then moving forward.
Yes.
Would be, you started your company, or what was that?
Yes, well, I started helping others in corporations try to salvage rail service on lines that were being abandoned, wholesale. And the federal government for the East and the Midwest at that time set up subsidies and grants so that local rail service could be preserved. Unfortunately, Minnesota, it was not directly affected, although the Rock Island was here in the Milwaukee. Their lines up here, for the most part, were either abandoned or preserved or purchased by the railroads.
So when you started your business, did you buy this company, or did it already exist?
It was the Minnesota Commercial was a successor to what was called the Minnesota Transfer, and it was a holding, it was a switching and terminal carrier owned by 7 railroads. And in its last years of operation, it was costing them over $400 a car, losing $3 or $4 million a year to operate, and they decided to spin it off. And as my wife said, "You're the lucky guy."
Oh,
and
okay.
it was a long-term lease.
Were you the lucky guy?
I was. I was. It was a long-term lease. It's got 20 years, and then it's evergreen after that. And that was the first portion that we picked up. And then other railroads came to us and said, "We don't want this line anymore. Will you operate it? We don't want that line."
Now, when you came into the business, how many people did you employ at that time?
At that time, the former Minnesota Transfer had 24 people left.
Okay, what do you have now?
About 120.
Wow, okay, so it's a substantial operation.
Yes, it is, yeah.
Okay. I wanted to get a little bit of history about commercial rail. First, I wanted to say, though, that I don't know if you're aware, White Bear was a rail hub.
Oh, yes.
And until the mid-'60s, White Bear Lake actually had a rail service that brought passengers up into the northern part of Minnesota.
Yeah, it was a train between Duluth and St. Paul.
Yeah, that's right. And we had a stop right in downtown White Bear Lake.
And there was a stop at Hugo. There was a station in Hugo, went all the way through Forest Lake and all the way to Duluth.
Yeah, so a little bit of history about the commercial rail service in Minnesota. You went over some of it. They have the main lines, but then you've got what they call the short lines, that go off, branches, that feed off. And
correct.
Are these owned by the major rail companies, or what happened?
For the most part, they are. They continued to do leases rather than sales, because if you do a land sale, it entails a tremendous amount of environmental stuff.
Yes.
So they're long-term leases for the most part, yeah.
Okay. So now these rail companies, like the one that you own, Are they facing any challenges in the state? I mean, are there issues that relate to the rail? They're part of their transportation system.
Yes.
Are there concerns about the future of commercial rail in our state?
Yeah, there are. The short lines especially. There's several of them that were spun off, and they still serve very important parts of agriculture, say the Twin Cities in western Minnesota. They bring in thousands of carloads of grain, DDGSs. They keep probably 300 or 400 farm communities alive. There's another one called Progressive Rail, which is Lakeville. They picked up an industrial park that the CP Canadian Pacific didn't want to operate anymore. And our railroad has picked up about 5 different line segments that the Class 1s did not want to operate anymore. They couldn't operate it officially.
Okay, so they do play an important part with local businesses throughout the state of Minnesota.
That is correct.
And also others in the area, the small towns. Some of them go into small towns and serve?
A lot of them go into small towns, a lot of rural communities.
What would happen if they stopped? I mean, what would happen if they stopped going into some of these
for example,
small towns?
If you take the Minnesota Commercial and our line to White Bear and Hugo, that serves an industrial park in Hugo, which I helped form with the mayor then of Hugo.
Right.
They needed it. They needed rail service for the industrial park to even be developed. And so we set up an arrangement and rail service was there. The line ended right there, but we worked with the community and set up rail service so they would have it. A siding was built to go into the industrial park.
Sure.
There's 5 or 6 businesses here just alone. You can Polar Plastics, Aetna Plywood, several in the White Bear Lake area that all came here because we developed them. They weren't here before.
Yeah.
So I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of jobs, but I know just the industrial park alone in Hugo, directly or indirectly, 500 jobs are associated.
That's right.
Yeah.
So when people say things like, gee, it would be nice to have a bike path instead of the rail going through, they maybe have a difficult time understanding that the rail also is a economic development driver in the area.
Exactly. They just don't understand it. And every rail car holds 4 to 5 truckloads.
Yes.
And the economics of rail transportation is such that in order for businesses to compete in the state versus somebody in Wisconsin, right, 20 miles away, we have to provide them competitive rail.
So why don't these businesses like in the Hugo Business Park say, gee, we'll just use trucks to transport our stuff? Is rail an efficient way to do it? And
it's less expensive. Truck transportation is 15 to 30% higher than rail. Or if you have to transload, that can be a 15 to 20% additive to transload. And then you take an industry or industries where they're all competing against everybody in the state. You no longer make them competitive. Their goods become more expensive.
I know a lot of people talk about environmental issues and the carbon and that is from the automobiles and trucks. So is rail then a environmentally good thing to have?
Yeah, statistics show, depending on the location in the area, we're 8 times more environmentally efficient than a truck.
Oh, okay. That's really interesting. And now you said that served these various businesses in White Bear going up to Hugo.
Right.
And I understand that that the state of Minnesota did, after a lengthy time period, actually came through and gave Minnesota Commercial some revenue.
Correct.
For that.
They gave us a grant to rebuild about 8 miles of track that was almost ready to be abandoned.
Oh, it was.
Yeah, it was very close. We had started in 2014, and we started with the shippers then, telling them, we got to warn you, we can't generate enough revenue to do any rebuilding. And we started, and it finally took to 2017 when all the shippers came together. You guys at the chamber came together and helped us, and without that, it wouldn't have happened. But that's what saved the line and the business.
We're going to just take a really brief break. And I have a couple of quick announcements about important chamber happenings. On October 30th at the Mung House in North St. Paul, the chamber will hold its annual Green Business Expo. This event runs from 5 to 7:30 p.m. It offers area business people an opportunity to learn more about important tax savings due to recycling and energy use. It's free to attend, and appetizers and a cash bar will be available. Further information can be found on our chamber website, www.whitebearchamber.com. With me is John Gohmann, the president of Minnesota Commercial Railway. I have some things too that I want to bring up with our interview today.
Yeah.
And one of them, we talked about how the rail was starting to deteriorate in our area.
Correct.
And I assume then that this is also true in other parts of the state of Minnesota.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. There's needs all over the state for small railroads that, which we don't have actually a good grant program in the state. South Dakota, Wisconsin,
Right.
Iowa, all have grant programs.
Right.
And we're always at a competitive disadvantage.
So the question I have is, some people might say, well, why don't you just go to the bank and borrow some money? And are there reasons why your industry maybe has some challenges in borrowing money that other types of businesses might not have?
Sure. There's several reasons. First of all, most of the railroads, the short lines, came in and took over these lines at what's called the normal end, or close to the end of the normalized maintenance cycle, meaning 20 to 25 years,
Yep.
line has to be rebuilt. So the second problem is, because they're leases from the big railroads, we can't put any liens on the properties.
Oh,
Period.
okay.
We
Yeah.
cannot put a lien on it, and therefore you can't borrow money. And there's some areas maybe where financing would work, but you can't put liens on it. Other areas, however, despite the fact that there's volume moving over it, it's not sufficient to even pay a loan back. As I say, other states have recognized that.
So and you mentioned that, and
Yeah.
you said that. So Minnesota, in the Midwest area, then
Correct.
is kind of alone
Yes.
in not dealing
Yeah.
with the critical need for
Yeah.
commercial rail service.
Yes, that's correct, yes. For example, one example, there's an industrial
Mm-hmm.
park funded by the state of Iowa in Manly, Iowa. It's called the Manly Industrial Park. We've lost chances, a couple chances, for customers in Minnesota because
Really?
it's gone to Manly.
So we've lost some economic development
yes,
opportunities
yeah,
because
yes.
of our rail service.
That's yeah, because we don't have the grant money is not out there. When there's grant money provided, which other states provide, and Wisconsin's the same way, there's no way you can match that, and no way the communities can match it. I know
Right.
of at least two communities, counties that would like an industrial park, and they have plans for it, but they can't fund it right now, and they would both use rail. Not even on our railroad, but
Yep.
elsewhere, yes.
You know, another thing with the commercial rail services around Minnesota is, I noticed here in White Bear area there's a rail bridge.
Yes.
And is that unique? Are there other rail bridges around the state?
Yeah, and especially the small railroads that go into rural areas and areas like this, there are a lot of bridges. There's watershed districts, there's drainage districts.
Right.
And those face constant problems because water flows change as the economics, for example, in Minnesota and up here, you've got a watershed district that is handling about 50 times the amount of water that it did 30 years ago because the whole area is growing. So green land has been displaced, and that changes things. Out in western Minnesota, I was just talking to somebody yesterday. They did get a grant in western Minnesota. The same thing had happened out there on a short line, and they did get a grant to replace a whole bunch of culverts that were no longer adequate for the water flows. So they got a grant through somebody, I'm not sure who.
Don't you need the bridges in order to serve the businesses?
Yeah, if you don't have the bridge, you're out of business. Period. And they're not cheap to rebuild or fix.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
I guess you would say who owns these bridges? I guess that's a big question that I would have in Minnesota. Who owns them?
We have one bridge for example, on Como Avenue that nobody claims ownership to. Nobody. Because that implies...
Who built it?
It was built by the state of Minnesota in 1936, but they don't claim ownership. You can't find the title. Yes, you can't find the title anywhere. There's other bridges like that all around the state on other railroads too.
And nobody knows who owns them.
Correct. Yeah. So the state says, well, it's your responsibility. Other issues are the use of road salt by the public authorities. It's just rusting out these bridges prematurely. There's so much to worry about and concern ourselves about.
Now, I'm not an attorney,
right?
But I want to ask. You said there are a lot of these bridges around the state of Minnesota.
Correct.
Okay. What happens? The bridges, there's no ownership.
Right.
What happens if a rail car is going across one of these bridges, and I imagine they probably haven't been looked at for a while?
Yep.
What happens if one of these bridges goes down and there's damage done and nobody owns the bridge?
That's
mean,
correct.
what isn't that set the stage for lawsuits?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. The public should be aware that by federal law, the railroads are required to inspect every bridge once a year.
Well, they are.
Well, they are. We inspect every single bridge on our railroad once a year. And we hire an outside independent engineering firm, and that's done by all the railroads in the state. The big railroads may use their own. So they are inspected, and we try. They catch things, which recently has just happened again with another bridge, that indicate there's some problems, and it's scour and sediment has caused wear and tear on the bridge and on the base, on the foundation. And yes, so we do check them all the time. And nevertheless, if you have a significant water event, all bets could be off. But what does that mean? Well, if you have a hurricane or something similar to that, all bets are off.
Wow.
And you constantly worry. In our case, we're taking some temporary repairs. It's going to cost us $150,000 to keep this bridge stable. So in the meantime, we're going to try to seek financing for it, because just like if any public authority damages somebody else's private property, and there's precedent, a lot of precedent for it, because of water flow changes. We're private property too, and it's a federal interstate corridor of rail transportation. It serves many industries.
I mean, typically you would assume that if the state of Minnesota built a project for transportation, that it would be their responsibility.
Sure.
Or the federal government, I mean, whoever.
And it's no different than a highway. When you build a 2-lane highway and a bridge goes over it, all of a sudden you need 4 lanes, they pay for it.
Yeah, exactly. And commercial rails a transportation system just like the others.
Exactly.
Okay. Now you mentioned, I noticed that sometimes when I see the rail cars go by, they'll have cars on them.
Correct.
And I think you mentioned that rail is a very important aspect for bringing other types of transportation to the public. Could you go into that a little bit?
I'd be glad to. What the public doesn't know is probably 80% of all new automobiles that come into the metro area all come in by rail. By all 3 manufacturers. And they come in on the Class 1s. They go to terminals like Maple Grove and elsewhere. They're unloaded and trucked to local dealers.
Yeah.
60% of the electricity in the state of Minnesota is generated by coal that the big railroads bring them to power stations. And then if you go to Costco, you go to Best Buy, you go to Walmart, you go to Amazon.com, there's hundreds of thousands of containers a year that come in, steamship line containers. They're all brought in by the Class 1 railroads from either exported or domestic U.S. locations. And 80% of all that stuff that people buy, it comes in by rail, but nobody knows it.
And then people just don't realize it.
They don't know it.
So. I would imagine that as we get into the next legislative session, I'm just speaking for myself here, but it would seem that coming up with a solution for particularly these rail bridges that nobody knows about needs to be a priority that everybody has to take a look at.
It does, and there's a county out just west of the Twin Cities that wanted a new industrial park, and they can't get funding for it. We tried last year. We tried to work with them, but it fell apart. It didn't get through the
Because of that.
legislature. Yeah.
Yep, yep.
And that's a county. They're trying to build a new industrial park. It'll cost them
Yes.
a couple $1 million to
Yeah.
put in the rail and build track up to their tracks. But
Yep. And John, if somebody wants to get a hold of you, what would be the best way to connect with your company?
you can just call our Twin Cities number. The general number is 651-632-9000. I have an office in Libertyville, Illinois, and one up here, and I'm between the two places.
Yes.
I'm in touch every day by email and phone, so it's not hard to get in touch.
Okay. Well, thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
this enlightening
Thanks for the
conversation.
chat. Thank you.
John, I appreciate it very much. This is Tom Snell, Your Business Matters. Thank you, John Goldman, for visiting with us today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
God bless. Thank you.
Yes.
You've been watching Your Business Matters. For more information on this program or the White Bear Area Chamber, visit whitebearchamber.com or call 651-429-8593.